Good morning, everyone. This is the Vermont House Committee on Commerce and Economic Development. It is Wednesday, March 8th, 2026 at 9:30 in the morning. So we're beginning our day to take a look at S-173. So we have Senator Weeks with us from Senate Economic Development Committee, the reporter of the bill for the Senate. Good morning, Senator. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Good morning, Phil. Ready to go?
Yes.
Okay, very good. So Senator David Weeks, represent Rutland County. I'm reporting S-173, an act relating to workers' compensation and the Vermont Labor Relations Board. So what we like to do is start out with to kind of articulate what the problem is we're trying to solve. All right. So in this case, I'll just give you a little data. I'll give you a little background, and I'll give you a very quick overview of the bill. See if you have any questions, and we'll go from there. So each year, roughly 16,000 Vermonters are injured at work. Okay. Of that, roughly 250 workers each year, which is about 1.5%, are out of work for 90 days or more. The 90-day milestone for a worker out of work is very significant. At this 90-day point, under current law, a worker is required to undergo an initial screening to determine if the worker is entitled to a full screening with a certified vocational rehabilitation counselor. The vast majority of initial screenings are passed to the full screening, and the initial screenings by non-specialists are seen to be an unnecessary burden. And all sides agreed in the review of the bill. So that's the problem we were trying to solve. So a little more background just to give you context of this environment. Vocational rehabilitation services are provided when a worker's injury prevents the worker from returning to a stable work environment or work employment for which the worker has prior training or experience. Vocational rehabilitation services are specifically tied to restoring the employee's earning ability. Services can take many forms, which include resume writing, interview skills, counseling, ergonomic modifications, assistance with job placement, vocational training, or education. Things which I think resonate with everything there. Most injured workers do not need vocational rehabilitation because they are medically released to return to work, or the employer has suitable work available for the worker, or the medical evidence already indicates that the worker will not be able to return to work given the severity of the injury. Okay, that's all background. So now to the bill. Very short bill, two sections. First section of vocational rehabilitation. This section provides that a worker who requests services or has been out of work for more than 90 days, this section removes the initial screening we just reviewed and is referred directly to a vocational rehabilitation counselor. But also in this section 1, cements the Department of Labor's workers' compensation form to explain that a worker has the right to request vocational rehabilitation services in the future should the injury continue to affect the worker's ability to earn the pre-injury wages. Okay, so it's just kind of like, okay, they have a problem. 90 days have gone by. They get their vocational rehabilitation training or not. They understand by the form which Department of Labor gives them that they have a future opportunity. That's all. Okay, but that's not in current practice. It has to be verbally explained if, in fact, it's ever provided. But anyway, it doesn't change the right. It just makes sure that the injured worker understands it. And then allows the injured worker, and this is significant, allows the injured worker to initiate rehabilitation services if the employer fails to. It doesn't happen very often, but it happens. So this allows the employee, to understand that they can initiate this process should the employer maybe not recognize they didn't need, should, or or some other circumstance. So that's it. That's section 1. Not too complicated. Section 2, less complicated. Vocational Rehabilitation Working Group and Report. Creates a working group to provide recommendations back to the General Assembly on how to improve the current system. The working group is composed of the Director of Workers' Compensation from the Department of Labor, 2 representatives of workers' compensation claimants, so lived experience, 2 representatives of compensation carriers, the big insurance companies, 2 certified vocational rehabilitation counselors, and that's it. The working group members, other than the director, who comes from the department, signed by the Department of Labor, are appointed, one by the speaker and one by the committee of committees. Okay, which I think kind of a new paradigm. Governor's not appointing, it's not staffed out with legislators. Okay, it's all folks with lived experience. There's only 7 of them. The first meeting of the working group to be held by August 14 of 2026 and may meet up to 5 times. The group will cease to exist on submission of the report to the General Assembly, December 15, no later than December 15, 2026. And the bill sets forth a series of questions, which I think would gain of great interest to you guys, for the working group to consider. The Department of Labor provides support to the working group. The effective date of the bill, as drafted and passed out of the Senate, is July 1, 2026. And the witnesses, I know that the chair has got a copy, not worth my going through, but that's the extent of the bill. Any questions?
Questions for Senator Weeks?
Okay, cool. I'm going to go back to
Eric?
Oh,
Representative Olson.
So, sorry, thank you very much. Any sort of issues that came up when you were deliberating, anything is to resolve with the committee differences?
well, what? No, in the end, no, everything worked out just fine. I think that it was, first it was an issue of, well, is this even necessary? And we heard both sides, both the those that had needed the services and those that had to pay for the services, but thought maybe, that the current procedures were appropriate, but over time it became apparent to us that no, the initial screening is not necessary, just kind of a stumbling block and a bit of an obstacle. That's really about it.
Thanks, Rick.
Pretty straightforward. Okay, good.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Sophie?
Good morning, Sophie Sidati for the Office of Legislative Counsel.
Have a whole new subject to talk to you about.
Yeah. Well, it sounds as if Senator Weeks did a pretty thorough job there, so. But it's okay if I go ahead and share my screen.
Yes, please.
So again, this bill is really focused exclusively just on vocational rehabilitation. And again, not everybody requires vocational rehabilitation. Typically, if you're out on workers' compensation, you've been out for 90 days, that's sort of the trigger for doing at least an assessment to determine whether you need vocational rehabilitation services to get you back into suitable employment, i.e. getting back to earning sort of the same earning capacity that you had before. This, again, as Senator Weeks just explained, this is just the vocational rehabilitation statute. And so again, here at the top of page 2, the new language makes it clear that an employee has the right to request vocational rehabilitation services in the future if the work injury affects the worker's ability to earn the worker's pre-injury wage. So this is addressing a situation where you may not need it right now, but because the injury that you suffered at work is going to impact you in the future, so that this is giving workers the right to seek vocational rehabilitation services at some point in the future, not right at the moment. And again, a lot of these are going to be deletions to take out this initial screening. So again, this is moving towards having vocational rehabilitation counselors doing the screening. The current system through the Department of Labor, it's the screening is done by members of the Department of Aging and Independent Living. The testimony has been that they're not particularly happy about doing it. They're not necessarily familiar with the workers' compensation rules. And again, you'll be hearing from the Department of Labor, so I won't go into that too much. So essentially what these amendments are doing on page 2 is really stripping out the references to initial screenings. So that's what all of this is doing. And then as we get down to F here, this is making sure that injured workers, if they are not referred for vocational rehabilitation services, that they are aware that they can initiate services themselves and with their own chosen vocational rehabilitation provider if the employer or the employer's insurance carrier has not referred them for an evaluation within the 90 days. And then again, Senator Weeks testified there was conflicting information about how well the current system is working, and there are flaws in it. And so the proposal from Senate Economic Development in this bill is to go ahead and create a working group to provide some recommendations to the General Assembly on ways to improve the current system, both to make sure that it meets the needs of workers that are injured and also that it's the system works in a timely and cost-effective manner. So taking into account cost to the system itself as well. And then this goes through the membership of the working group, again, being led by the Director of Workers' Compensation and Safety, and then with 2 representatives from the Workers' Compensation claimant end of things, 1 appointed by the House, 1 appointed by the Senate, 2 representatives from on behalf of employers and insurance carriers, again, 1 appointed from the House, 1 appointed from the Senate, and then 2 vocational rehabilitation counselors certified in Vermont. Again, 1 appointed by the House and 1 appointed by the Senate. I will just note one of the issues that came up that isn't addressed that you may want to consider as an amendment is this is not explicit that the Director of Workers' Compensation and Safety would serve as the chair. So it does provide, as we'll see as we go through this, that he will call the first, well, he right now, but the director would call the first meeting. But it may be worth just adding some clarification in there to make clear that the director is anticipated to be the chair.
Don't we usually say the Commissioner of the Department of Labor designate and the Commissioner would designate the?
It does say, well, we have it as the Director of Workers' Compensation and Safety or that designated.
The Commissioner of them.
Yeah. And then, so again, the group would meet over the summer to discuss recommendations on how to improve the current system and to prepare recommendations for the General Assembly. And then it lists out what some of those questions could be. So what mechanisms could better identify which claimants are likely to require the services?
The way I read it is that working group, these questions are the only things that they can consider. Is there any other language that says that they, and any other thing that might come before the working group?
It's not that open-ended. I mean, it says they shall consider these things. It doesn't say they can't consider anything else, but that may be something else to consider, giving some flexibility on that. So yeah, this just lists out the particular questions. So again, how to better identify which claimants might need the services. Could the utilization of the services be improved by enabling claimants to access vocational rehabilitation benefits while receiving wage replacement benefits? So some of the information or the testimony in Senate Economic Development was that injured workers receive wage replacement benefits, but sometimes by the time they're receiving vocational rehabilitation services, they're no longer eligible to receive that wage replacement. So they're not able to take advantage of the vocational rehabilitation services. So it's a way to think about, can you align it so people can actually be accessing these services while they're still receiving wage replacement benefits? And again, the diminished capacity of the claimants who are unable to earn a pre-injury wage but are not eligible to receive permanent total disability benefits. Should the average weekly wage be indexed to the cost of living for vocational rehabilitation purposes? What improvements could be made? And some of the current requirements are too onerous and administratively unnecessary. There was some testimony that maybe there's just too much. And again, maybe this is more to do with the initial screening, but are there ways to streamline the process to make it more effective? And then could there be improved oversight by the Department of Labor? And then is there a way to make these services more cost effective for the workers' compensation system as a whole? So again, it's trying to find that balance between the needs of the injured workers along with the costs on the other side. It provides that the director would call the first meeting on or before August 14th. This is quite a tight timeline here. The Department of Labor would provide the administrative, technical, and legal assistance. And then the report would be due on or before December 15th and would come to this committee as well as to the Senate Committee on Economic Development, Housing, and General Affairs with its findings and any recommendations. And then the working group would cease to exist. The compensation and reimbursement, this bill would go in front of the Senate Appropriations Committee. There's no appropriation being requested here. The funds, the payments of the reimbursement of expenses would come out of the Department of Labor's budget, and there was testimony from the Department of Labor that they thought they would be able to do that out of currently appropriated funds. That's it. The other piece is this bill does not include an effective date right now. The effective date is July 1 of 2026. That's kind of the default by statute, but that would be something else if the committee is interested in making any amendments to just officially add in an effective date to it.
Questions for Sophie? Okay.
Great.
Thank you, Sophie. Hi, Lauren. Good morning. Thanks for joining us.
To see everyone. For the record, Ron Hawthorne, Policy and Legislative Affairs Director at the Vermont Department of Labor. Thanks for having me today to talk about S-173. This obviously is a bill that originated in the Senate. We were invited in to testify twice on this, and we gave a couple of different points of testimony, but overall we are comfortable with the bill as it's written, although our legislative council did just bring up a couple of valid points. We have found that the initial screening is unnecessary. As Senator Weeks testified, most of the folks that go through that initial screening are deemed eligible, and any that aren't, it's mostly just it has to do with timing of when they're going through that initial screening. So they may not have fully gone through all of their medical appointments. They may not be deemed quite ready to get to that point yet because they're not at the point where there's where they're no longer improving at all medically. And that's usually where voc rehab would then come into play, is if individuals have gone through any medical appointments, any physical rehabilitation, and then they're at the point where they have reached their it's called their maximum medical improvement. Maximum medical improvement, and that's usually where they would be referred to voc rehab.
Is there, so to get to their maximum medical improvement, wouldn't it, I guess I can understand removing the initial screening, but at that point, wouldn't the medical providers send that letter to the employer, and meaning, and when we say employer, this also committee, except for her. When we say employer, we're talking about the workers' compensation insurance company carrier.
My best understanding of the system, and Attorney Mascott may as well have more
Jamie's here too.
information, yes, as well. Is that they've gone through initial, they're out of work for 4 days, and then they would be considered eligible for wage replacement or indemnity benefits. Around, so just as kind of some numbers, is looking around 2,400 to 2,500 Vermonters receive these wage replacement, and then around 10% of those, that's around 250 to 300 people would then go through it. So they're out of work for the 90 days that would then trigger the carrier's notification responsibility. And so then they would go through that initial screening with hireability folks, and then once hireability has deemed them, yes, you're ready to go on to the next stage of screening, essentially, then they would go to the carrier's book rehab screening, and then that screening would then determine if there's going to be a work plan that is filed by the carrier that then goes to the Department of Labor, which we screen as well before that's approved, and then they're ready to go on to the voc rehab plan itself. So this initial screening we would think it's unnecessary just because they've already been out of work for 90 days. They're going to go to that second screening anyway, most likely. And so this would just remove that initial step that might prevent them from getting to their benefits a little bit faster. If they're not deemed eligible, they would be, again, it's usually just because of those medical benefits, so they would have to continue having that, having medical treatment. I don't think there's anything you would add.
I'm happy to explain the processing more thoroughly when I testify. Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, we dealt with this a number of years ago. I remember going through this and starting to come back. And then, yeah. Cool. Okay, we can. I think we want to hear from hireability. I don't believe the Senate heard from them.
They did not. We spoke with them and they said that they're comfortable with it. Folks that are doing the screening have not been trained in voc rehab screening for this, for workers' compensation, for the purposes of workers' compensation. So the screening sometimes can take it's supposed to take 10 days, but sometimes it does not meet that 10-day threshold. And like I said, they have not necessarily been trained in this type of screening. And so there may be some inaccuracies and some things that need to be adjusted or fixed afterwards. I would be happy to provide committee assistance with contact for hireability and
Touch base with Matt.
Yeah.
Do you have data that shows from year to year how many people wind up in full rehab, and are we seeing, is it fluctuating every year, or are we seeing it drop because businesses are making sure that safety protocols are being followed? But
I don't have the data on me, but I'll find that and
Okay.
follow up with the committee.
I think it'd be interesting to find out, make sure that safety protocols are being followed. I mean, you're always gonna have accidents, but the more we can do to prevent accidents, the
Yeah.
cheaper, or the rate, keeping the rates down for workers' comp is.
Absolutely. Yes, I will certainly find that and follow up with the committee.
Okay, thank you.
I think the only other point, unless you have any other questions right now, would be on the study committee, which we are also comfortable with. To the legislative council's point, we would be comfortable with the commissioner being or designee being named as the person to call the working group together and then chair it as well. Just for flexibility in case it is needed at some point in time to ensure that this is done. It is also, as the legislative council said, quite a tight timeline as well. So if the committee wanted to push this out, that may be easier to really produce a very thorough report and to be able to have the time needed and also in between to be able to, for each individual to be able to do the research that they were needed to talk to any constituents or clients and make sure that we really have all the information that we need to answer their questions properly.
You have a suggestion?
I think pushing it to 2027, December 2027 should work fine.
November 1, 2027, just to make sure we hit all of our deadlines for,
For drafting,
yeah, draft.
second year of the Biden.
That would. Early in the year, October would work fine,
Yeah.
just maybe to have like an additional 6 months, honestly, would probably be helpful.
Yeah, that is a very tight time.
Yeah, because by the time we get everything set up, it's gonna be at least September.
Yes, most likely, yes.
Okay. And the commissioners comfortable with being able to, department being able to reimburse expenses.
We are comfortable, it should work within the current budget, and if it's also distributed over a longer timeframe, it would be easier as well, given the different fiscal years and the different budgets.
The number of meetings is the right number of meetings, even if we're
There's nothing-
having, yeah, I think it was 5
Yes,
expenses for not more than, second to last line, expenses for not more than 5 meetings. If we're extending it out,
Mhm.
is that the right number?
that,
You want to get back to us?
yeah, let me get back to you on that if that's okay. I will speak with the commissioner and enter to see what he thinks of the attendance can be
I
extended.
think it probably could be even extending the timeline. I think a lot of work can be done by the department in between meetings, so the meetings could stay that way and still a lot of research can get done.
Yeah.
More meetings.
Yeah, but yeah, let us know. Your thoughts are on.
I certainly will, yes. And our director of workers' compensation is out this week and so he's unable to attend today, but if you would like him to come in as well next week to talk about further, answer any other questions that I can today, I'm happy to put that in.
Yeah, we'll set it up for next week. I think this associated industries of Vermont can't make it in this, might not be able to make it today, so we want to give everyone an opportunity to speak. I think I want to have a conversation with CCY if the Senate did that, just to make sure that having price out this bill, make sure that it's either kind of neutral, it's going to cost workers some. It could be a decrease too, but I think we want to understand that as well.
Any other questions I can answer right now?
I think we're good.
Thank
Thanks, Ron.
Kelly?
Yeah, right. Good morning. Thank you for having me, Kelly Massacott. I'm here on behalf of the Vermont Association for Justice, which was the trial lawyer. Somebody changed their name, more gentle. I don't know, the joke about wearing a cape, I guess. So I work, I'm a partner at the law firm with Big and Fox Skinner here in Montpelier. And I've basically been doing workers' compensation for 20 years. I also did a lot of social security disability work for a number of years, but basically it's all workers' comp for me, representing injured workers. And this bill is really pretty minor in terms of getting rid of that initial screening. And I'm very glad that on the Senate side, they sought to add the summer study, because honestly, there's a lot of waste and inefficiency in this voc rehab side of the comp system, and it needs to be totally overhauled and improved. I'll just mention there was an attempt to change some rules around voc rehab several years ago, and I led the fight to fight those, and they didn't go through because it wasn't enough, frankly. We really need to fix voc rehab because there is a lot of waste and inefficiency in the system. So I welcome the summer study. I welcome the additional language so that the summer study could look at other ways to improve voc rehab and not just those specific questions, because I do think that there's a very small number of people, injured workers, who need this benefit. But for the people who need it, they really need it. And we need to figure out how to get those people that benefit earlier and make it meaningful for them. there's so much waste going just to a lot of reports, a lot of counselors just going and meeting with people, and then not a lot of actual real benefits going to the injured workers who need it. So just to back up a little bit, so there's 4 main benefits in the workers' comp system that an injured worker could be entitled to. And this is the last of the 4. And the way that I explain it to a client that I might be meeting with for the first time is voc rehab is supposed to help those injured workers whose work injury leaves them unable to make that same kind of money they were making at the time of the injury for that job. So I just want to make this point because it's very important. It's different than a personal injury claim. If I, as an attorney, decided I'm going to take the summer off from my law firm, I'm going to go pick potatoes for the summer, and I get injured picking potatoes, and I haven't practiced law for 6 months, but I get injured picking potatoes and I get a brain injury, and I can't really pick potatoes anymore. My voc rehab, I'm going to be entitled to it, but my voc rehab benefits are about trying to replace the wages I was making picking potatoes. Workers' comp doesn't care about what I was making as an attorney and trying to replace that wage, even though that was my earning capacity. If you get injured in a motor vehicle accident and it's some other driver's fault and you're suing or making a claim for a personal injury claim, in a personal injury claim, you can go after compensation for, I used to be able to be an attorney and now because of this accident, I can't anymore. Even if you weren't practicing at that time, if you still had that capacity. You can't do that in workers' comp. It's the job you had and the earnings you had in the 6 months prior to, assuming you're still continuing that. It's the job you had and are continuing to do until the injury. So it's those wages we're trying to replace. It's not your earning potential. That's a really important point. And if you have the capacity to earn that same kind of wage, even with the injury, you're not going to be entitled to voc rehab. So it's a very small subset of people that are actually entitled to this benefit. But again, we need the people who are going to be entitled to be found entitled earlier and to get started on it earlier, because there is this mishmash in the comp system where people who may be entitled to this benefit, and let me be clear, we don't always know early on. We can't always forecast that. And sometimes it's going to take a while before that can be identified and confirmed, because the medical evidence can't confirm it until there's more treatment and we're seeing how they recover. So sometimes it is on hold that we can't determine that the person's entitled to voc rehab. But with my experience as a Social Security disability attorney and doing this for 20 years, sometimes I know the injury. I've seen it enough times. I know that the treating doctor is going to support me to say, yeah, that person's never going back to doing whatever boiler work again. They're probably not going to be able to be on their feet again, considering the severity of this particular injury. If I can get that person starting to work on some computer classes while they've got 2 years, while they're still recovering from this injury, boy, do I want them to start on those computer classes. All of the evidence shows that somebody who is geared towards having a plan, focused on returning to work, and engaged in that is better for them. It's better for their recovery. Not only that, but the way the comp system works is the wage replacement benefits right now are not tied to voc rehab. A lot of people may not be identified as being entitled to these benefits until they're actually at the end of their medical recovery. That's when their wage replacement benefits get cut off. They might be entitled to a little bit more money in the claim, maybe a lot of money depending on their injury, what are called permanent impairment benefits. But it's not tied to their wage replacement. So the earlier we can identify these people in the medical recovery process, and it's not everybody, again, we might have to see how they're recovering. Some people can be identified much earlier in the process. And if they're getting those wage replacements because they're recovering from surgery, they're having a bunch of PT, they need another surgery. If they can get the voc rehab benefits while they're being paid because they're out of work and recovering, that's better for everybody. A lot of people are not getting, especially if they don't have counsel or they don't have good counsel, they're not being identified until the end of the medical recovery process. And frankly, they're being squeezed and screwed. They're like, okay, and this is if they have a good voc rehab counselor. And I hate to say it, the vast majority of them, and that's why the summer study should be reviewing this, they're not great counselors, the vast majority, and I'll go on the record saying it. We need better counselors. if there's a counselor who says, oh, you're entitled to this benefit, a lot of the people say, I can't afford to do it. I gotta get back to work. I have to work. Somebody's telling me I'm entitled to this much in permanency benefits. That's only gonna last so long. So it's great you're telling me I'm entitled to this benefit, but I can't even take advantage of it. The Senate side heard from a workers' comp VR counselor who I would welcome, please have her testify or listen to that testimony. She explained how broken the screening process is. It was meant as an attempt to try to expedite and make it more efficient. It doesn't work, folks. Get rid of it. And with all due respect, you don't really need to listen to hireability, but have them come in. They're not trained, the state VR folks are not trained on the workers' comp side of things. They don't know what is the trigger for eligibility. The form that they're being asked to use and ask the injured worker, it's way more nuanced than the 3 questions that they're being asked to ask the injured worker. It's so broken. But the VR counselor from workers' comp who testified on the Senate side explained she had a client and she saw what happened prior to it reaching her. The person was sent for screenings at the 90-day mark, which frankly doesn't always happen. I bet it doesn't even happen 50% of the time. It's supposed to happen at 90 days out of work. A lot of time there's a lag there on the carrier side, which is why we want this provision in here that says that 90 days, the injured worker can do it. The injured worker can trigger it if the carrier hasn't. When I started practicing 20 years ago, we were allowed to do that. We were allowed to file the form. And then at some point, one of the claimant's attorneys checked with the DOL, and the DOL said, legislature hasn't specifically condoned that, so I guess you can't do it. We've been doing it for years, but what is that? Ask for, apologize, permission, whatever that saying is. Please let us do that, because under the law right now, once a VR counselor is assigned, I'm allowed to switch them anyways. I can choose my own counselor anyways. So just let us file the form if the carrier hasn't done it. So the VR counselor who testified for the Senate explained in that case that she had, the screener was assigned. The screener looked at the evidence and said, for a guy who I believe he installed stovepipes, very, very heavy work. I want to say he was in his late 40s. He had an injured foot and ankle. Even though the evidence, I would know looking at this, yeah, this guy's probably going to need voc rehab, send it on. The person said, no, but send it around for another screening in another two months. 3 months later, it goes for another screening. The guy tried to go back for work. It was unsuccessful. He's got a non-healing fracture in his foot. Send it for another screening in another 60 days. Like, it's not going to the next level, which doesn't even mean he's entitled. It's just, that would mean going to a VR counselor who knows workers' comp VR. That's what is being held back. It's still stuck with the state hireability folks. So now it's at the second screening. 60 days later, that person now understands they're headed for another surgery, actually. And then they also learn that the employer says, we're never taking this guy back unless he's 100%. Because I know from my experience that somebody with a foot and ankle injury is likely not with this kind of, they're never going back to this heavy work with this kind of ankle injury. It's not a good idea. Send it back for another screening in another 60 days. By the time it finally the guy hires an attorney, not me, it's somebody else in my office, she's jumping up and down. She's BS over this, guys. She finally gets it beyond the screening to the VR counselor within the workers' comp system. The guy's at medical endpoint, meaning he's at the end of his medical recovery when he finally meets with a VR counselor who can try to put together a return to work plan to figure out, how can we retrain you? How can we get you back to making what you were making before? The guy can't afford to do a plan. His wage replacement benefits are gone. He begs his doctor, can you please release me to do work on my feet? I have to provide for my family. By this time, he's living in a hotel, by the way, because workers' comp only pays 2/3 of what you were making prior to your work injury, because it's not taxable income. And at some point, I guess people thought people paid a third income tax. I don't know, but most people, all my clients are doing worse on workers' comp, not better. People are losing financially when they're on comp. So this guy finally is put in touch with somebody who knows what they're doing for voc rehab, but he can't even utilize it. And he's pushing his doctor to do something that's not medically recommended. Let me go back to work on my feet, because that's the only kind of job that somebody's going to hire me for. And so is he likely gonna have another workers' comp claim someday? Yes. That's bad for everybody. Not only is it bad for the injured worker, it's bad for employers, it's bad for business, it's bad for the system. Go ahead, yeah.
Thank you very much, and I am keeping up as best I can. Can I ask, are we seeing in the list, as per the list of questions or just?
For the summer study?
Yes.
Sure, yeah.
If you, one of these that came up that you may have heard is, oh, the working group shall consider the following questions.
I'm open, any improvement.
But, and I'm just curious, do you find that the list, I think there's 8 questions there, are they adequate for the issues that you're sort of flagging right now, the narrative we're?
I think they're a great list, but I absolutely support it being more open-ended so that if the group thinks of more ways to improve the system, that they could consider those. I don't think it should be limited to that list. I think that, but I do think that there's a number on, yes, I think there's.
There are other questions that you're like, hey, this would be a good thing to ask.
I think this is a great place to start, yes. I can't think of any right here that I'm like, oh, they missed this question or that question. But I don't necessarily think it should be confined to that list. If the group gets together, because I do think the other stakeholders here, the carriers, the business leaders, everybody should be part of this, you know? The top-notch VR counselors, you know, because I'm sorry that right now, what the statute says about who is a VR counselor who's certified under the comp system, they don't even have to take any sort of Vermont test. I mean, I think you could be I don't think you have to be a counselor in vocational. I think you can be like a mental health counselor and become a voc counselor for workers' comp. I mean, we need to have more stringent standards. They need to do less busy work on these reports. There needs to be, like, in my opinion, the person at the DOL who oversees the voc rehab issues should themselves be trained in the voc rehab side of things, the person deciding the issues on voc rehab stuff when there's a dispute. But back to the bill, it was well-meaning to have the state folks do the screening. It just hasn't worked out in practice. And I have to be honest, just doing this for 20 years, it's not just that there's a delay. I'm very fearful that sometimes they're getting it wrong and they're saying, no, this person shouldn't go on to the next level of having the workers' comp VR people review and do an entitlement assessment. I think that there's cases certainly where they're actually getting it wrong and not sending it on and just saying, you're not entitled, you don't even go to the next step, you're all set. The truth is, we have this 90-day trigger. Somebody's out of work 90 days, and that's like the trigger to try to identify filtering, might you be entitled to this benefit? I have to tell you, that actually doesn't catch everybody who might be entitled to this benefit. An employer who accommodates somebody has a work injury and the person might never go out of work or go out of work a short time. An employer who tries to accommodate them, and I appreciate that because all the studies show people do better who continue working. I want that, you know, we all want the injured worker to do better. But if that person is making less money after the work injury because they're in a different position, they might be entitled to voc rehab. And that person's not going to be caught by the filter of, have you been out of work 90 days? The other thing I wanted to clarify is, I think Senator Weeks might have misspoke slightly when I might have heard him say that they're obligated to be screened. That's also not entirely correct. A lot of people get the form that says you've been out of work 90 days. Are you interested? A lot of people answer no. They don't know what this means and they don't know what they're giving up, potentially giving up, because again, a lot of people are not entitled to the benefit. I totally welcome this study. Again, the VR, for the people who are entitled, who would be entitled, it is such an important benefit. And for them to be involved in the process and to be identified earlier, there's a lot of people with a lot of great skills and businesses need these people. We need a better way for employers and businesses to identify these, to be matched up with these workers earlier. It would save carriers money. My clients would do better. They would be getting back to work better. It would be, the whole system would be better. There is a lot of inefficiency and waste right now on the voc rehab side. But this very, very small start of getting rid of this unnecessary step of screening at this by the state folks please, folks, let's do it. Hireability agrees. They know that they're not the best people to do this, honestly. Thank you. I'm very passionate about this, obviously. Yeah.
Kurt?
So, thanks very much. Yes, you are passionate about this. That's a good thing. What I was hearing you say seemed to be focused on the issue of that folks who are injured aren't getting the benefits earlier when they could benefit from it. That's what I was taking away from what you.
For voc rehab, yes.
So I confess, I'm just looking at the list of questions this morning. That doesn't grab me as part of, I mean, I think there are a lot of details, questions, but the sort of big picture of how do we get folks who might be eligible for benefits earlier doesn't leap out to me.
Number one, sorry to interrupt you. What mechanism could better identify which claimants are likely to require voc rehab services? Number one.
Well, okay, I'm just saying that somehow you could better identify it, 120 days from now. But I think your point was trying to get some sort of determination of eligibility sooner. Not just correctly, but sooner.
Yes, and I think it's number one. And frankly, I think it's also number two. If there was, and I'm not saying, it's a suggestion that came up in the Senate that one of the senators asked me when they understood this thing about, wait a minute, people can't take advantage of voc rehab because their money runs out. If there was a tie between the wage replacement and voc rehab, don't you know the carriers would make sure they get their voc rehab a whole lot sooner? That's number two there, right? Could utilization of voc rehab be improved if they get their wage replacements with voc rehab? It's just, and I don't know what other states do, right? I'm not sure what other states do. It's something to be considered about it. Better counselors. If there were better counselors, that would deliver more efficient, quicker services. The folks that I think deliver the better, that know the law, know the rules, deliver better services, they're getting quick results. They're identifying the people earlier, and they're getting services and benefits to the people earlier. It's not an exhaustive list. I welcome any ways to improve the system, honestly.
Thank you.
Yeah. As I said on the other side, this is against my own self-interest because a lot of people feel squeezed and then they're like, I guess I'll settle my claim out. I make a fee when the case is settled. I'd rather my clients get voc rehab benefits, honestly. I really do. A lot of people are very cynical about voc. They're like, oh, doesn't work, doesn't matter. Like, it should work. We need it to work for people. Too many people's work injuries leave them unable to, if they can't get back to the money they were earning for the injury, it just is so broken, this system, and it shouldn't be. It's minor stuff that they might need, a class or something, just to be able to get back there. Another problem, and it is in the list here, is we're trying to replace their wage at the time they got injured. Sometimes that's 3 years ago. There should be every other benefit where we're looking at the wage they were making is tied to is there's a cost of living adjustment. Why is that not included, right? I was just talking to a client yesterday and I was like, yeah, you were injured 4 years ago, but we're trying, we're stuck with that wage. That's the wage we're trying to replace. Every other benefit in the system, the wage replacement and the permanency, is benefits from a COLA, cost of living adjustment. And I do think with voc rehab, that should be considered as part of it too. But just my thought on it. Obviously, there's other stakeholders and they have their opinions about that as well.
Emily?
Thanks. You were mentioning that there are currently trained up counselors that are doing this work in Kenny. This might not be a for you question, but do you know just sort of proportionally how many of the folks are actually well trained in this area?
So the people that do the initial screening, as I said, are state folks, and those I think we should get rid of. I can't think on the list of certified voc rehab counselors. I'm not sure, Rowan. There's probably a couple of dozen. I could look it up when somebody else is testifying. Honestly, if I could be totally honest, when I meet with a new client, I say there's a couple of dozen and there's less than, on one hand, how many I think honestly are worthwhile to work with. If I could be totally honest. I really think, probably get some hate mail after this testimony, but I really think that there's just not a lot of great counselors out there. They get referrals directly from carriers. They want the ongoing business. And I think we need more stringent standards for folks. And a lot of people learn by the people who train them. So I'm not even sure if a lot of it is intentional. I think we need to require higher standards so they can deliver better services. It's not all cynical.
Who determines these voc rehab counselors? How do they, is there a certification process? Do they make a deal with an insurance company?
So
How do they
by,
get their jobs?
so by statute, it lays out what the qualification or the requirements are. By rule.
Mhm.
Statute and rule, and then they're listed on the Department of Labor website. And then there's different companies. Some companies are large, they might have 10 on staff. Some people are solos and they might be a one-person show. And carriers right now will issue what's called a VR1, assigning somebody. But as soon as they do that, I can file what's called a VR8 and say, I don't want that person, I want this person. Which is why I think it's a no-brainer that I should be able to file my own thing if they haven't assigned somebody after 90 days. That's the other frustration is right now, if the carrier hasn't done anything after 90 days, I have to kick and shove at the DOL. Could you please have the carrier send this for screening? And then I check in after a few weeks. Did they send this for screening? They didn't. They didn't upload the medical records. Could you please bug them to send this for screening? So I'm waiting for somebody at the state who's not well trained to do something I don't think they're really gonna do maybe properly. It can take months. And then it finally goes to the VR counselor. That can be a delay. Having the ability for me just to file it shortcuts it. And that's for people who are represented. Obviously, there's a lot of unrepresented folks who wouldn't know how to avail themselves necessarily of that process.
So just to follow up, these counselors, are they self-employed?
Some of them are,
Okay.
some of them work for
So as
larger
opposed to being
companies.
appointed by the state?
Yeah, they're not
Okay.
appointed by the state. The carriers refer them. And then an injured worker or their attorney is allowed to change and pick somebody different.
Okay.
But they work for private companies. Yeah.
Okay.
The people who actually provide the services. Yeah, we're trying to eliminate that first step of the hireability folks, the Dale and hireability folks doing that initial screening, which really is unnecessary.
Yeah, I mean, that helps because if we're gonna, if they need to be better trained, that helps me to understand where we can address that.
Right, I think the state folks doing the screening, just eliminate that. It's not a matter of training, it just is the wrong people to do it. And then the summer study, I think is the folks to look at, how do we improve the people really determining eligibility, the entitlement assessment of injured workers, and working with the injured worker if they are entitled to figure out a return to work plan and what the benefit, what the plan should be, the training or education should be. Yeah, I think it's the summer study people to look into that and see what different qualifications or background. I mean, honestly, I think a test of some sort would be good, right? A Vermont, right now, there's no Vermont specific test that these folks have to do to prove that they know Vermont workers' comp folk rehab rules.
Now, are there other states where they have a test?
I don't know. I just know I care about Vermont and our system and that we deliver
Sure.
good services for our injured workers. One of the larger employers of rehab counselors, I think one of the people that trains their new, I didn't even know, I was like, I don't know that person. I've never seen them deliver services. They're the ones training the new people. Just think they need to be familiar with, Vermont workers' comp rehab rules.
Can you remind me, so the VR, either solo or part of a company, they're paid by the carrier, is that it? Is that
They
the
are
way
paid
it
by
works?
yep.
And so what's the, I suppose I should ask one of the carriers, but what's the sort of the ongoing relationship between the folks who, is there any ongoing relationship between the VR folks and the carrier, or they just pay the bill?
They pay the bill. I think certain company, my understanding is they might have an ongoing contract, but because I always have the right to change it, they can't mandate, right, that all of their claims have that company's voc rehab counselors. They may always initiate, we're gonna use this company's voc rehab counselors, but since the injured worker can always choose a different one. Unrepresented injured workers don't likely understand, or even if they did, they may not know who a good or better counselor is. So they're not gonna switch it out necessarily. I have had cases where I've heard from voc rehab counselors, I refuse to work for that insurance carrier. They want to pay me less than what the statute basic, like there might be an agreement with certain companies and carriers, voc rehab carriers, to pay a lower rate than what the statute actually might call for voc rehab.
So, and who initially signs the VR counselor? Is that the
Carrier.
The carrier?
Carrier does. Which is again, something we're hoping with this bill would change. If the carrier hasn't signed someone after the 90 days, right now that's the trigger. And that's something that the summer study would look at. Is there a better trigger than out of work for 90 days? Right now, the trigger is somebody's out of work 90 days and the carrier is supposed to send this along for consideration. And the bill does say, hey, if they haven't sent it along after 90 days, let the injured worker or their attorney assign a counselor. And again, when I first started, we were allowed to do that. And then at some point, the Department of Labor said the legislature didn't specifically give claimants that ability, that right. So it has to be the carrier to do it. Because I have the right to switch the counselor as soon as they assign it, just give me the right after 90 days to start the process. It's again, another way to just be more efficient, start the process sooner. This bill right here really is a no-brainer for just trying to be more efficient about the current process. And then let's all think about how to make this better, cut down unnecessary costs, identify the injured workers who really need these benefits, and make it better for everybody. I mean, I want injured workers to go back to work sooner. I want them to be able to get back to their average weekly wage. And I don't want unnecessary, when I see the closure reports and sometimes see how much is spent, or when I switch over a counselor because I just take on a new client and I switch the VR counselor that maybe been on the file with that person unrepresented for 2 years, and I see how much that VR counselor, who I don't think is very good, has charged on the file, that's when I see what they've charged. I get mad. It's wasted money. It's not money well spent. If carrier's spending that kind of money, let it go to services my client really needs. Not a lot of reports with a lot of words and not a lot of outcome. That's right, outcome. Look, some cases, voc rehab is going to be expensive, people. I'll be honest, it's going to be expensive. Serious injuries, it's going to be expensive. It has to be. But there's a lot of cases that people just don't even need it, or it's going to be cheap, especially if it gets like identified early. But paying somebody just to drive back and forth to an injured worker's house once a month to just go sit in their kitchen and chat it up without really, I mean, I did have a defense attorney tell me recently, like she assigned voc rehab as soon as she got on the file because she said, wow, it's a way for my client to really like kind of get in there and, kind of get information, like get contact with your client. It's another way to kind of get in there. It wasn't about offering services. It was about, oh, you're an attorney on the file. We can't talk directly to your client anymore. But if we have a VR counselor on it, they've got an in with your, with the injured worker. So we need to fix the VR system.
I think, yeah, I think we need to really look at the questions that are being asked. I think they need to go a little deeper than what they are right now. When you talk about VR counseling, I would think that the working group should really look at what's the certification process? Should Should it be a licensure? Should they be licensed in the state of Vermont? Who provides the training for the VR counselors? I mean, there's a lot of things there, I think, that really need to be looked at. I know when we talked about this a number of years ago, you know, we were worried at that time that that the carriers or the employer was having a counselor when someone's in the Northeast Kingdom and they have a counselor from Bennington or Brattleboro, having, you know, all of that time is spent driving, right? And I think we've made some adjustments at that point, but it sounds like more adjustments still. Emily?
Actually, we found the list. And now,
Thank you.
yeah, and now I'm looking at it to Chair Marquette's point. There are a number of folks that are registered out of the state of Vermont. And I'm wondering if this is like, as over time, has this become sort of a telehealth kind of assessment, or how much does?
Sometimes they might be using a centralized address, even if they live locally.
Okay.
There are some that are out of state, and that also doesn't make sense. You don't know the local labor market. You know, you're out of Massachusetts, like, and listen, I have a client right now who was injured in Vermont. She worked for the state of Vermont. She happens to live in Massachusetts in the northern part. So there are, like, it's not that there's no injured workers in Mass, but if you're a VR counselor located out of state, I don't know, you know, does it make sense that you're assigned to people in northern Vermont? You know, that definitely happens because maybe they work for Gen X or one of these bigger companies and they have an agreement with certain carriers that you're going to, for all of our Form 1, you know, VR1s, which are the assigning of the VR counselor, we have an agreement with your company, all of our Form VR1s are going to go to you guys. So they do have centralized addresses sometimes.
Okay.
A lot of the counselors do just work out of their homes and leave from their homes and go. But unfortunately, we don't have, there are spots where there's not, you know, where there are not counselors located, you know, deserts, VR deserts, I would say. And when I say there's only maybe a handful that I think are really excellent, that there's a lot of desert for me. I'm begging certain people, when do you have an opening?
Kelly, can you put together something that you can send us in writing of everything that you've been talking to us about?
Sure.
Because I think we want to use that and match it up to the questions that the Senate had put in.
Sure.
And I think we need to redevelop those questions to make sure that we're getting at what we want. The answers to the questions that we're asking.
Sure. Yeah.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Other than just having another question that kind of says, and anything else that the committee feels would improve the system.
Well, I think there's things, you know, I think you know what the questions were, how they were developed and what they might mean to you.
Yeah,
But I don't know that for a committee to take a look at, they might not understand, you know, what your depth was.
I see.
So like number one, you know, I think
Yes.
we want to get deeper into, you know, VR counselors and that understanding and a better understanding of, you know, the length of time. Is 120 days correct? Or should there be the ability to assess each individual with a maximum of 90 days so that there can be this spread of, you know, if you're out of work and you go back to work, like you were saying, but you're in a lower paying wage, you get a lower wage for doing a different job, then really want those people to be able to get back to work if possible and make the same wage they were making.
Yes.
So, you know, I think we want to put more meat on the bones, I think.
Sure, absolutely. And I will mention, there is one of the questions in there is about, there is a subset of injured workers I want to mention that is never going to be able to get close to what they were making, who is also not, there's this other benefit called permanent total disability, like you're never going back to work, not, you know, not even the very lowest, you know, minimum wage, whatever. There's that huge, it's a huge loss of earning power and there's no compensation for that person. And so there's the consideration, and again, I don't know what other states do, and that's something that can be looked into. Should there be something for that type of person that, and it's a very small subset of people, but I've had a couple of those clients over the years, and it's usually an older worker who is, 5 or 10 years from retirement that is not totally disabled. It's not that they can't do any work, but boy, they've lost a lot. And I just don't know if there's anything to perhaps compensate that person. But that's just one of the things. I'm happy to prepare something like that to review and look at each of these questions to kind of talk about what it would address. And then the other points I've made today about the deficiencies in the system right now.
But I think, you brought up what other states are doing. So what do other states do when it comes to VR
Yeah,
counselors, right? How do they license them? How do they make sure that they're qualified to do the job?
yes. And
What does certification mean in other states?
I will try to talk, there's some resources within the American Association for Justice that I might be able to tap into with seeing what they can help with seeing what other states do with that. Yeah.
But I think that could be part of the questions too, in the
Yeah.
questions for this working group to figure out, is take a look, make sure you're looking at other states. What are other states doing? And that's round 2.
And I'll be honest, we can't make it so onerous that we don't have enough counselors to actually be doing the work. That's another,
Exactly.
that's another,
You wanna
we
make-
can't have it so onerous that they're gonna charge so much that there's, carriers can't pay it, there's not people doing it, that's, I understand the balances
But you
here,
want to make sure that the people that are doing it are qualified.
Absolutely. It's a real frustrating, there's a lot of cynicism on both sides of this, defense attorneys and people on my side, the claimants attorneys for sure.
There's got to be some floor standard that people have to meet to
Yes,
become a VR counselor.
yes,
And then how do you hold them accountable,
yes.
right? When they're not performing.
And I do, as I said earlier, and I'll just repeat it, I do think the position at the Department of Labor overseeing this should be somebody trained in boat rehab. Yeah.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, I think, part of your testimony again, seemed to talk about how do we get folks, good counseling at an earlier stage. And I appreciate that people really work hard on the questions. From someone just coming to look at it right now, that doesn't sort of, so maybe, if you're looking at how other states handle the VR certification and licensing process, I'd also be interested in, what are the procedures in terms of timing for how you access those benefits? That sounded like.
Yeah, and I think, we'll need to understand what can be done by rule. So what can Department of Labor do by rule? And what needs to be done statutorily?
So just a thought, would it organize the working group sort of, if we started out by saying, there's almost like a vision for the system, right? Like we want a robust system with qualified workers, with early intervention when possible, it's almost like here's a vision of a really highly functioning system that's affordable, then the questions listed after that, just a thought. So like 3 sentences of, we want an affordable system that serves Vermonters, and here's the questions about how we can get there.
So I'm just doing a little searching here, and there is a gold standard of certified rehabilitation counselor that's nationally recognized. Also, Virginia and Florida have documented certified, credentials for that. And there's also the federal government for vocational rehab counselors for federal cases. So those might be some good places to start.
And it might be better to have like Karina Dunnigan or anyone, someone else. She's the one who testified about the specific facts on that screening issue on the Senate side. I do believe that they may have to have that national certification. It's the Vermont specific. That's the problem. I think voc rehab is a different animal in many states. Like, I believe some states allow you to hash it out, right? Like there can be a identified, okay, you can take this benefit or you can take a monetary dollar amount. Like they're in the statute. I think some states may not even have voc rehab. I'm not even sure. I think it's very different in different states. The fact of the Vermont specific is a big problem here that I think that needs to be addressed, that there's not, to be a voc rehab counselor in Vermont in workers' comp, I don't think you have to prove any proficiency with regards to Vermont workers' comp rules or statutes. That's a big problem that I see here.
Any other questions for Kelly? Okay.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Judith, with us? You online, no? Jane?
Morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thanks for the invitation to appear this morning on behalf of the American Property Casualty Insurance Association. APCIA is a national trade association with over 1,000 or so members, writing all lines of property and casualty in Vermont, including workers' comp. And so pleased to be here on S-173. We've had some comments on the Senate side. Let me start by saying, it's our shared goal to help injured workers get back to the job. And we believe effective voc rehab is a tool to help accomplish that. Let me just also start by providing a little bit of some data. I know we like data in here. So a little bit of context behind the comp system. We know it's a different type of an insurance line. The licensing and premiums are handled by the Department of Financial Regulation, and the benefits and the overall system handled by the Department of Labor. Workers' compensation carriers and DFR rely or consider a lot of information that comes from the National Council on Compensation Insurance. So that's the NCCI entity that Chairman Markup was mentioning before, that is yet to kind of weigh in on this bill. But they provide, through their services, data tools, compensation information. And among that data shared to the department and to carriers are what's known as projected loss costs for the coming year. And loss costs are the portion of indemnity and medical costs, and they're the significant driver in workers' compensation premiums. And over the last several years, we've seen a notable trend that I think is worth highlighting. In 2017, there was a 7.9% decrease in loss costs. 2018, 3.7% decrease. 2019, 5.1% decrease. 2020, 11.6% decrease.
Jamie, are those decreases year after year?
Year after year.
So they're compounding?
Correct. These are largely a reflection of efforts by DFR to focus really on some high risk occupations and to try to bring those costs down. And I won't bore you, but 2023, 6.7%, 2024 flat, 2025, 7.4% decrease. So one translation might be, the system's working to help bring costs down. Obviously, voc rehab is one piece of the overall system, but this is significant and worth noting. But despite all of that, Vermont still has, at least compared to nationally, premiums that are above the national average. So it's a good trend line that we don't always have a chance to share in insurance. Speaking to the proposed bill, I know you're focusing a lot on the study, and rightfully so. With the committee's permission, I'd love to be able to check with my clients to see what questions will be asked as well, because one piece that was, of course, of importance to insurers and employers was cost effectiveness, and that lens of making sure that this isn't sort of an open-ended check. And Ms. Mascott's right. Every state is different in terms of voc rehab, but maybe you look at the benefits. I hear from APCI carriers again that Vermont's an expensive voc rehab state compared to others. So what are those factors that make it more expensive than some other states? I'm not prepared to address those today, but certainly that could be something that the carrier on the committee could bring up. And it's important, I think, for that lens to not be forgotten in terms of cost effectiveness.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not just cost effectiveness, but it's also effective outcomes. So if we're paying a bunch of money here and our outcomes are here, there's a problem. And how do we fix that problem?
And remembering our shared goal to get the injured employee back to work, I mean, whatever helps to do that, I'm sure is a big fully supportive of doing so. So section one, it hasn't had a lot of attention yet this morning, but that removes in its entirety the screening process that I imagine was put in place for a purpose. There's been some discussion. It feels a little bit like deja vu to me. You may recall last year's workers' comp bill and the issue of penalties and fees and whether insurance companies were paying late on purpose or whatever. And this committee was very interested in the data related to that. And so you asked for a study, or rather a report to start coming in. I kind of feel it's the same this way. It seems sort of anecdotal in the absence of data. So I'm encouraged to hear you request for that information from the department, because what I hear from APCIA members is that they don't hear of problems with injured workers getting access to voc rehab. They don't hear of a broken system. So again, they're questioning, the need for this particular division. I'm a little confused about some of the data being discussed, because I heard in the Senate committee from the department that 40% of those in the screening process were deemed not to be eligible for a full voc rehab screening. So I encourage you again to look into those numbers. That sounds like a pretty significant number. It sounds like there's some impact someplace. Whether or not a portion of those are further reviewed and entitled to move on, I don't know. I don't have those numbers. We haven't been presented with those numbers about what's been suggested over on the other side. And I hear lots of sort of faults or accusations related to the current screening process, but again, from our perspective, this seems to be an issue, right, to just roll into the study rather than take it away with its entirety. To ask the questions about, what are the appropriate counselors? If the ones who are doing it now aren't happy with their job or they're not the right ones, let's find some different counselors. There seems to be a reason for the screening process. If the questions being asked now aren't the right ones, what are the questions that should be asked? If the information isn't reaching claimants, whether they're represented by attorneys or not, let's find out why it's not reaching claimants, rather than removing a process that at its face, at least as far as I've heard, seems to be doing some level of its job and throwing it in its entirety in the absence of this information. That's not quite seen right from our perspective. So I'll stop there. Happy to follow up as the committee continues to do so. I will, if I'm not sure if it's a green light or not, but in terms of trying to come up with some issues that the study might look at. Carriers will be a part of that, obviously. Again, the cost effectiveness or costs in general, I think will be important. And to have some voices on the committee to look at that will be helpful to the discussion.
Questions for Jamie? Herb?
Yeah, so thanks very much. You mentioned, I think, in a few elements in the cost loss picture, and I think medical costs, and just payment benefits, and then there's a VR cost in there too, folded in.
Sure.
And maybe there's something that you need to go back to your folks, but it'd be interesting for me to see how those different components are changing over time too.
Yeah.
And frankly, just how much is VR actually costing? It'd be just good to know. Is it a small amount, or is it something material?
Agreed. I'm happy to look into that. Obviously, loss costs are one element, as I mentioned. It's the majority that goes into the premiums, but utilization of services,
Right.
payroll, wages, size,
Sure.
all these voc rehab, the
Sure.
benefits in general,
Yeah.
all administrative costs by the insurance companies. So
Dreaded administrative.
Right.
No, excellent. I have one follow-up, and that is, I think, here's some testimony about, trying to get injured workers involved in rehab sooner rather than later, kind of thing. Is that a goal that your folks share? And if so, you don't have to answer now, but at some point it'd be interesting to know what things you, if you agree with that goal, what you could look at. And I'm thinking of the questions, making sure that those questions answer, the options and what should be done.
No, thanks for that question, because I don't want to give the impression that nothing's done for 90 days, right? Insurers will diary the case and, they might have a trigger at 85 days and then send the vote. But carriers will also physically send someone out, to the injured worker to see how they're doing and look at options to get them back, prior to that 90-day period. So I'll come back with some more examples of what happens within that.
Yeah, and any sort of conclusions about, or recommendations you have about accomplishing that goal. Great.
Well, and then on top of that, what happens, for example, at Kelly, worker goes back to work, but they didn't go back into the same job that they had and they're working at a lower wage job. What happens there? Would VR counseling be appropriate then? Do they get a partial payout because they can't earn as much as they were earning before? I think it'd be good for us to understand how that works. Jonathan?
Jimmy, thank you for the information about, we got a nice trend in those losses or decline in those losses year over year. Is there a commensurate decline in claims?
I'll have to look to see what the department would have those numbers better. But the Department of Labor, it's GFR can also share. Like any claims, I'm sure there's, bigger ups and downs.
I mean, I can imagine that and as, Chair said, there's complications to it. Sure. Because there's the wage that are entitled to versus, what have been. So I understand that it wouldn't be as simple as a one-to-one relationship, but an understanding and claims going down is also, it's nice to have it on the one hand and losses in the other.
Yep, absolutely. And as I mentioned, those other factors can help push back on decrease in loss costs, like maybe a company increase their wage, their employee force, so their wage base went up. Claims, another way of looking at the number of claims might be how often is the system utilized. Yeah, those are factors that can either enhance or push back, as I said, on the loss costs.
I'm gonna just get back to the VR counselors. Do you have any feedback mechanisms there where I'm assigned a counselor by the carrier and they're just doing a terrible job? Is there like an 800 number that I can call to send out surveys? Is there any feedback system?
Yeah, let me look into that if I can a little bit more, because it was interesting discussion this morning. It hadn't come up in terms of the qualifications of the counselors in Vermont versus elsewhere. And
Well, that can be costly to the carrier. If they have someone that's doing a subpar job and not being able to get that worker retrained and back into the workforce, the carrier's just paying. They're paying for the VR counselor and they're paying for wage replacement.
it's to their benefit to have a well-qualified, efficient counselor. But as Ms. Mascott pointed out, the claimant is also entitled to switch counselors.
Quick questions for Jamie?
Thanks again for the invitation to come in. Always enjoy it.
Oh, thanks, Jamie. We look forward to the hearing from data back. Yeah, thank you. David? Did you want to have you down? Did you want to weigh in?
David Converge here. Appreciate you taking the time on this bill, and we're very supportive of moving this forward. We think any opportunity to get workers either retrained or back to work is a positive opportunity, both for them individually in their lives, but also broadly for our economy, for the workforce. I mean, we know that one of the biggest problems in Vermont right now, right, a big problem in Vermont is getting enough workers in the workforce, and it's an ongoing issue. So the extent to which this screening process, which we agree with Kelly's sort of unnecessary and has caused delays, to the extent to which this screening process can be eliminated and people can go through the entitlement assessment and get the actual voc rehab counselor engaged in their future work life. We think that's a positive step forward. Also, I think this study is very helpful. I'm sure there's more questions that can be asked, and including one where, as we, I think, Ms. Mascott alluded to it, when somebody's done with their sort of compensable part of their workers' comp life, but continue on voc rehab, they may not be in a place to go back to work, but they're no longer receiving any compensation, and it puts people in a difficult position. So I think among the issues that this committee should look at is there maybe an appetite for compensation for people at some level during the rehab process when they haven't returned to work, but their indemnity benefits, their wage replacement has ended. So just something to think about. I've practiced workers' comp law myself and have seen both the positives of voc rehab where people have been retrained. I remember a case client that I had that was pretty seriously injured. She was a blacksmith and was able to go to school and retrained and go on to have a successful career, and was very grateful for the system. Other times, there have been instances in which the system, both because of delay, but also just because of the effectiveness of the system, didn't work as well. And those were, I just should mention, those were the people that were represented by attorneys. I think the vast majority of individuals in the workers' comp system go unrepresented. So we have to think through the lens of how to make this system easier, better, more efficient, and more effective for them. For the people that are trying to navigate it on their own, which is it's difficult for attorneys to navigate it. It's a specialized area of practice. There's not too many workers' comp attorneys out there. And so imagine trying to navigate that on your own as an unrepresented claimant, talking to insurance companies, having to deal with adjusters in a world in which their lives have just been turned upside down by a work injury to no fault of their own. And so making the system, and I think getting rid of the screening process, making the system run more smoothly so they can actually get toward their goal of returning to work or finding alternative work through the voc rehab process. I think it's a really important thing for workers in Vermont. So.
I realize this would be a highly situational, but has there ever been any discussion, some of these people who were working in these trades, got injured, cannot return to those trades, about retraining them as teachers to teach our youth in CTE?
I haven't had a case like that. I think it's certainly a good idea. I mean, their retraining is an available option. It just depends. Some of the factors to consider is like how, depending on the injury, how long can they be on their feet? Do they have a sedentary work condition, or can they be physically active? So, but I think it's a good idea if it's something that person is interested in pursuing. I think it'd be great if they were given an opportunity to do that. Yeah.
But again, the individual, what the individual would like to do too. It's not
right.
I said highly situational.
But it is, I'll just say, in the time that I did workers' comp cases, it's really, frankly, I mean, not to be melodramatic, but it's heartbreaking to see somebody who's spent their entire lives making a decent wage, certainly in physical labor jobs, where, all of a sudden a back injury means that they can't do profession that they had done for decades of their life, and now have to, many of my clients who are in their 50s, 60s, having to face something totally outside of what they know and what they've been able to do. And that's why if we can really make sure that the voc rehab system is something positive, plays a role, and is effective to get quickly for them, it can help them not just with their how to earn the previous wage and things like that, but sort of in the mindset that there is a future for people. Because too often, you see the fact of being out of work as sort of cycling through people and the depression, mental anguish, all of a sudden, somebody's been out of work for 6 months or a year. They don't know what they're doing. Their future is in, their sort of financial future is in jeopardy because the compensation part of workers' comp comes to an end. And the fear of that is real, and then in some ways makes the injury even worse. So the physical injury then has sort of mental health manifestations that cause further problems for the individual. So getting this voc rehab piece right, getting them in early, and having the person that knows what they're doing effectively analyzing what they can and can't do for their future, I think is essential, not just on the economic side, but the actual health of the person. So we'd be excited if this bill were to move forward, and happy to work on with others on the study side of things to make sure that it really addresses all the issues that we want to address.
Other questions for David? Thank you, David.
Thanks so much.
So I know we're waiting for Amy. And you didn't get anything from Judith or? Is Amy gonna be
Did you guys?
Okay. Why don't we take like a 5-minute break? We take here for 11:05 because we have one presenter coming at 11:05. So we can go off live.